Mafia boss walks in at midnight, freezes seeing his triplets and Maid in tears. He had ended negotiations with a single nod. He had built his empire on silence, fear, and the kind of stillness that made grown men step back without knowing why. But nothing. Not the raids, not the blood debts, not the night Ji-eun's car exploded while his heart was still inside it, had ever cracked Kyung-soo open the way 3 crying children and 1 quietly breaking Maid did at midnight. The black SUV moved through the rain like a shadow that didn't want to be seen. Kyung-soo sat in the back seat, jaw set, eyes empty. His coat carried the smell of a meeting that had ended badly for everyone except him. His phone screen glowed, 19 unread messages from men who would not sleep until he replied. He didn't look at it. He hadn't been home in 5 months. Not because he forgot. Not because he was too busy. Because walking through that door still smelled like Ji-eun. His wife, dead 14 months now. Gone in a car explosion that had been meant for him. A woman who had loved him past every sharp edge he had, and paid for it with everything. The triplets, Ha-jun, Yi-jun, and little Min Seo, had been barely past toddling when she died. They were older now, growing without him in the room, learning to laugh without waiting for him to come home. Good, he told himself, watching rain streak the tinted window. Distance keeps them safe. Kyung-soo had made a decision after Ji-eun's funeral. Love was a liability. The people closest to him became targets. So he provided money, security, a full staff, the best of everything, and he kept himself at a clean, protective distance. He told himself that was enough. It wasn't. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city's silence, inside that same mansion, a light was still on. Halima had been awake since 2 in the morning. She sat on the nursery floor, back pressed against the wall, knees pulled close, the soft night light casting everything in amber. 3 small beds. 3 little faces finally still after hours that had not been still at all. Ajun, Ji-eun, Min-soo. She had held all 3 of them through it. The crying that wasn't tantrum crying. The kind that comes from somewhere children shouldn't have to know about yet. They had found Ji-eun's scarf in the laundry room. And the questions had come like a flood Halima could not dam. Where is Mama? Does she know we miss her? Can she still hear us? Halima had answered every question as gently as she knew how. And when the children finally exhausted themselves into sleep, she had let herself cry too. Quietly, carefully, the way a person cries when they've been strong for too long and the night is the only thing watching. She whispered to herself, hold it together. Just hold it together. Before we go further, do you think a man like Kyung-soo, a man who chose an empire over his own children's grief, deserves a second chance at love? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. The front door opened without a sound. Kyung-soo moved like a ghost through his own house. A habit, a survival instinct that had never fully switched off. He stopped in the hallway. Through the open nursery door, the night light bled into the corridor. And what he saw inside rooted him to the floor.
No time.
Halima
Just
was
take her
still
and run.
on the rug. Her uniform sleeves were rolled up. Her hair had come loose. She was holding Min Seo against her chest. Min Seo, who had finally fallen asleep with tiny fingers fisted into Halima's collar like she was afraid to let go even in dreams. Ha-jun and Yi-jun were curled together, their small faces still marked with the tracks of dried tears. They had been crying. All of them, including Halima. Kyung-soo's hand found the doorframe. He had watched men beg. He had seen rivals crumble. He had walked through rooms where the air itself was afraid of him. None of it had ever touched him the way this did. He stepped inside. Halima turned. Shock broke across her face as she scrambled to stand, still holding Min Seo, voice catching. "Yes, sir. I didn't know you were. Why are they crying?" His voice was controlled, cold, but his eyes were not. Halima hesitated. She looked at the boys, still sleeping, then back at him, and he saw something in her face that wasn't fear. It was the quiet, tired composure of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was deciding, right now, whether to set it down. "They found their mother's scarf," she said softly. "In the laundry room. They've been asking questions about heaven, about why she hasn't called." The The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. "Did you tell them?" he asked. "I told them the truth," she said. "That she loved them more than anything, and that missing someone means they mattered." Min-seo stirred and tightened her grip on Halima's collar in her sleep. Kyung-soo took a step inside. Ha-jun's eyes opened, small, still half in a dream. "Daddy!" The word hit somewhere Kyung-soo had walled off. He knelt, slowly, awkwardly, like a man who had forgotten how. "Are you staying tonight?" Ha-jun asked. The answer used to come easily. No. But tonight, looking at Halima's tear-streaked face, the way she had been holding his children like they were made of something fragile and irreplaceable. "Yes," he said, and something in the house shifted. Morning arrived cold and strange. Kyung-soo sat at the kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, coffee untouched, staring at nothing in particular and everything at once. Halima moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the triplets, acting as though last night had been ordinary. It hadn't been. They both knew it. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, without looking up. "Stay on the floor with them for hours." Halima paused. "It's not in my job description," he continued, jaw tight. "Crying with them." She turned slowly to face him, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't fear. It wasn't apology. It was something quieter, steadier. "With respect, sir," she said carefully. "Neither is being the only adult in this house who talks to them about their mother. But here we are." The kitchen went very still. Kyung-soo's eyes lifted to hers for the first time. Cold, searching, unreadable. "You're speaking out of turn, Halima." "I know," she said, turning back to the stove. "But someone has to." The triplets tumbled in moments later. Ha-jun first, then Ji-eun, then Min-seo dragging a stuffed bear, and froze when they saw their father still sitting there. Min-seo moved first. She crossed the kitchen in small, determined steps, reached up, and pressed her tiny palm flat against Kyung-soo's arm. "Daddy stayed," she whispered, looking back at her brothers like she was reporting something miraculous. Kyung-soo's throat moved. He looked away quickly, but not quickly enough. Halima caught it. The exact moment the most feared man in the city nearly came apart over a 3-year-old's hand. She said nothing. She set a plate of food in front of him. And that was the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. To understand why Kyung-soo stood frozen in that hallway, why midnight kept finding him at the worst possible moment, you have to go back 5 months. Back to the night he last walked out of that house, and why he told himself he would not return. He stayed. Not because he planned to. Not because anything in him had softened overnight. He stayed because when he finally rose from the nursery floor at 2 in the morning, Ha-jun's small hand had found the sleeve of his coat. Not gripping, not demanding, just resting there, trusting. And Kyung-soo had not been able to move. He told himself it was one night. Then morning came. Then breakfast. Then Min-seo climbed into the chair beside his without asking, dragging her stuffed bear, and ate her rice with the serious concentration of someone conducting important business. He stayed another night. Then another. By the 4th day he stopped counting. He noticed things he had no business noticing. Ji-eun refused milk unless it was warm twice, once to temperature, then left, then warmed again. Any other way and he would push the cup to the edge of the table without a word, patient and immovable as stone. Halima knew. She never forgot. She never made him ask. Min-seo's hair was long now, longer than Kyung-soo remembered, and every morning, Halima sat her on a cushion and braided it with a quiet focus that Min-seo submitted to completely, occasionally offering opinions in a language that was half Korean and half something only the two of them understood. Ha-jun had nightmares. Kyung-soo learned this on the 2nd night, when he heard movement in the hallway past midnight. He had followed the sound instinctively, hand already reaching, and found Halima already there, sitting beside Ha-jun's bed in the dark, not speaking, not rubbing his back or offering words, just present. Ha-jun's breathing had steadied within minutes. Kyung-soo stood in the doorway and said nothing. Neither did she. When Ha-jun was asleep again, Halima rose quietly, turned, saw him standing there, and simply nodded once before returning to her room. No explanation. No performance. Just steady, quiet care that asked for nothing in return. It was the steadiness that undid him, because Ji-eun had been like that. The memory came without warning, the way grief always does. Ji-eun on a Sunday morning. Min-seo balanced on her hip, humming something tuneless while Ha-jun and Yi-jun argued about nothing at her feet. She had looked up at Kyung-soo across the kitchen and smiled. The small one, the private one, the one that said, "Can you believe these three?" He had barely looked up from his phone. He remembered that now. He remembered it every time he watched Halima braid Min-seo's hair. Every time she warmed Yi-jun's milk without being asked. Every time she sat in the dark beside Ha-jun and gave him the gift of not being alone. The guilt was not loud. It did not announce itself. It sat behind his sternum like a stone and grew heavier each day. He had been here. He had been present, technically, in the same house, the same rooms, and he had still managed to be entirely absent. He began eating meals with them. It started as coincidence. He was passing through, the table was set. Min-seo pointed at the chair beside her with the authority of someone not accustomed to being told no. He sat. The next morning he was already at the table when Halima brought the children down. She said nothing about it. She set a plate in front of him as naturally as if he had always been there. As if his presence was not extraordinary. As if he was simply a man who ate breakfast with his family. He was not sure he deserved that grace. But he was learning slowly to stop refusing it. Halima remained professional throughout. Warm but measured. She called him sir. She did not overstep. She did not ask questions about where he had been or why he was finally here or how long he intended to stay. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, he caught something in her expression. Not pity, not judgment. Something more like quiet relief. Like a person who had been carrying weight alone and had felt, without ceremony, someone else take a corner of it. The house had begun to breathe again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just differently. Like a room where a window has been cracked after a long winter. He was in his study on the fifth evening, reviewing figures he was not actually reading, when his phone lit up. Suk-jin. He let it ring twice before answering. Boss. The voice was careful. Measured in the way it only ever was when the information was not good. There's something you need to see. A file came through this afternoon. Bring it tomorrow. A pause. I think tonight would be better, sir. Kyung-soo set down his pen. In 15 years, Suk-jin had never pushed back on a timeline without reason. Fine, he said. Come. He ended the call and sat for a moment in the silence of the study, listening without meaning to the sound of Min-seo laughing about something down the hall. Then he straightened his coat and waited. Suk-jin arrived at 9:10. He came alone, which meant the information was not for anyone else's ears. He set the file on Kyung-soo's desk without preamble. A thin folder, paper-clipped, unremarkable in appearance. The kind that tended to contain things that changed the shape of a room permanently. Updated background on the household staff, Suk-jin said. Routine review. But this one, he paused. Read it yourself. Then he stepped back, clasped his hands and waited. Kyung-soo opened it. Halima, age 29, Nigerian national, resident 7 years. Former elementary school teacher, resigned 18 months ago. No disciplinary record. No criminal history. No surviving family in the country. Reason for resignation. Personal bereavement. Fiancé, Adekunal. Killed in civilian crossfire during a syndicate dispute 14 months prior to her employment here. The syndicate involved. Kyung-soo stopped reading. He already knew the name. It was the same syndicate he had dismantled last year. Surgically. Completely. An operation that had taken 4 months and left no functional part of their network standing. He had considered it clean work. Necessary work. He had never counted the civilians. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He read the name again. Adekunal. Then he closed the file. That will be all, he said. Suk-jin nodded once and left without another word. Kyung-soo sat alone for a long time after that. The file lay closed on the desk. He didn't reopen it. He didn't need to. The information had already arranged itself into something he could not unsee. Halima, arriving at his front door 8 months ago. Quiet, disciplined, highly recommended. He had read none of her file personally at the time. She had simply been staff. She had walked into his house carrying grief he had a hand in creating. And she had never once let it spill. He found her in the kitchen just after 10. She was wiping down the counter, methodical and unhurried, the children long since asleep. She heard him enter and glanced up, professional reflex, then returned to what she was doing. "You lost someone," he said. "No preamble." He had never been built for it. Halima's hands stilled on the counter. A beat of silence. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you tell me?" She turned then, slowly setting the cloth down, and looked at him with an expression that was almost tired. Not offended. Not afraid. "You don't strike me as someone who wants to discuss feelings, sir." He said nothing, which was, in its own way, confirmation. He studied her face, looking for something: anger, calculation, the particular stillness of a person who has been waiting for the right moment to use what they know. He had learned to read people that way. It had kept him alive. He found none of it. "You knew," he said, "or suspected, that the people responsible for Adekunal's death were connected to my world." She didn't flinch. "I suspected," she said. "Eventually. And you stayed." "Yes." "Why?" The question landed plainly between them. He wasn't accusing. He genuinely did not understand. Halima was quiet for a moment. Not hesitating, he realized, but choosing. There was a difference. "Because revenge doesn't bring anyone back," she said finally. Her voice was steady, unhurried, like someone who had already made peace with the answer long before tonight. "And your children didn't choose your enemies. They didn't choose any of this. They just needed someone to show up." The kitchen was very still. Something moved through Kyung-soo's chest that he could not immediately name. Not guilt exactly, though guilt was part of it. Something older, heavier. They just needed someone to show up. He thought of 5 months of absence. Of a nursery floor he had never once sat on. Of Hajun asking, "Are you staying tonight?" The way a child asks who has already learned to expect the answer no. He thought of Ji-eun. "You could have left," he said. "After you knew." "I could have," she agreed. "But you didn't." "No." She held his gaze evenly. "I didn't." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had walked into his house carrying her own wreckage, and chosen, quietly and without recognition, to protect 3 children who were not hers. He didn't have words for what that was. He wasn't sure he deserved to. "Good night, Halima," he said finally. "Good night, sir." He left the kitchen. But the weight of what she had said followed him down the hallway, up the stairs, and into a room where sleep, when it finally came, was not restful. He had built his empire on the certainty that everyone operated from self-interest. She was making that very difficult to believe. He arrived on a Tuesday, unannounced, the way he always did. Byung-chul had perfected the art of appearing before you had time to prepare for him. Sharper suit than necessary. Eyes that moved too quickly through a room. The particular smile of a man who considers observation a competitive sport. Kyung-soo's older brother. The only person alive who spoke to him without measuring every word first. Kyung-soo received him in the sitting room. They talked business, a territory dispute, a pending negotiation, the kind of conversation that required no warmth to conduct. It was efficient, professional. Then Halima passed through the hallway with Seo on her hip, Hajun trailing behind her, and Byung-chul stopped mid-sentence. His eyes followed her. Not obviously, not crudely, just tracked. The way a man tracks something he is filing away for later. Kyung-soo noticed. He said nothing. Byung-chul stayed for dinner. He hadn't been invited. He rarely needed to be. The table was fuller than it had been in months. The triplets in their seats, Kyung-soo at the head, Byung-chul across from him. Halima moved between kitchen and table, setting dishes down, refilling cups, keeping the kind of quiet, efficient presence that required no acknowledgement. Byung-chul acknowledged it anyway. "How long has she been here?" he asked, cutting his food with precision. 8 months. "And she eats with you now? Or just serves?" She doesn't eat with us. A small sound, non-committal, the kind that was designed to plant something without being traceable. She seems very comfortable. Kyung-soo looked at him. She's good with the children. Yes, Byung-chul agreed pleasantly. That's what I mean. Across the table, Minaseo knocked her cup and Halima caught it before it fell. A reflex, smooth and wordless, and set it upright without breaking the children's conversation. Ji-eun said something that made Ji-eun laugh. Halima smiled. Byung-chul watched all of it with the quiet attention of someone collecting evidence. The study. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had gone still, Byung-chul settled into the chair across from Kyung-soo's desk with the ease of a man who felt entitled to every room he entered. She's gotten close, he said. No preamble now. The pleasantness had been left at the dinner table. She's competent, Kyung-soo said. She's comfortable. There's a difference. Byung-chul leaned forward slightly. A woman with grief in her past, no family nearby, complete access to your home and your children, and now your dinner table. You don't find that worth examining? I've examined it. Have you? His voice was measured. Reasonable. That was always the most dangerous thing about Byung-chul. He never raised it. A grieving woman is sympathetic by nature, Kyung-soo. She doesn't need to scheme. She just needs to be present while you're vulnerable, and proximity does the rest. Kyung-soo said nothing. Byung-chul pressed the silence like a bruise. A woman that close to your heirs represents leverage, whether she intends it or not. He paused. And in our world, intent is a luxury we don't get to assume. The words landed with surgical precision. Because they were not unreasonable. That was the problem. They followed the same logic Kyung-soo had applied to every other relationship in his life. The logic that had kept him breathing when other men had not. In our world, intent is a luxury we don't get to assume. She's a maid, Kyung-soo said. She's a woman your children are attached to. Byung-chul rose, smoothing his jacket. And you're starting to be too. That's not a small thing. Not for a man in your position. He left without another word. Kyung-soo sat alone. The file was still in his desk drawer. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The facts were already there. Atakunal, the syndicate, the connection she had admitted to suspecting. She had walked into his house knowing. She had stayed knowing. She had said, revenge doesn't bring anyone back. He had believed her. He believed her still. But belief in his world had a short life expectancy without evidence to sustain it. And Byung-chul had not accused. He had simply asked questions that Kyung-soo now could not stop asking himself. Down the hall, Ji-eun cried out softly in his sleep. Within moments, Kyung-soo heard the quiet sound of Halima's door, then her footsteps, steady, unhurried, moving toward the nursery. She didn't know he was listening. She never performed for an audience. And yet, even the instinctive, ungoverned care of it, now sat differently in his chest. The seed had been planted. And Kyung-soo, who had survived this long by trusting almost no one, did not yet know how to pull it out. He waited 2 days. He was not a man who acted on impulse. He observed. He measured. He let information settle until it revealed its own shape. 2 days of watching Halima move through his house with the same unhurried steadiness she always had, warming Ji-eun's milk twice, sitting with Ji-eun through the dark, braiding Minaseo's hair while Minaseo offered opinions on a subject only she understood. 2 days of watching and asking himself the same question. What does she want? On the third morning, he found her in the kitchen after the children had gone to the garden. He closed the door behind him. I need to ask you something directly, he said, and I need you to answer the same way. Halima set down what she was holding. She turned to face him, and whatever she read in his expression made her go still. Not afraid, not defensive. Just still. Braced. You knew the syndicate connected to Atakunal's death was connected to me. I suspected, she said. I told you that. You suspected. And you took a position inside my home anyway. He kept his voice level. You built trust with my children. With my staff. You made yourself necessary. A pause. Say what you mean, sir. Her voice was quiet. Not wounded. Precise. Is it possible, he said carefully, that you came here with a purpose beyond employment? The kitchen was very still. Halima looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that does not flinch, does not perform, does not reach for anything. Just looks. You're asking if I came here for revenge, she said. I'm asking if it's possible. It's possible, she said. The same way it's possible that you hired me to have access to someone connected to that syndicate. Possibility proves nothing. His jaw tightened. Halima, I came here because I needed work, she said, and now something moved beneath the steadiness. Not anger, something older than that. I came because I had lost everything and I needed to be useful somewhere. And I stayed. Her voice dropped, not breaking but lowering. Because those children were alone in a way that had nothing to do with you or Atakunal or any syndicate. They were simply alone. And I know what that feels like. Silence. Your children are not your enemies, she said. They are not leverage. They are not consequences of your world. They are 3 small people who did not choose any of this, who wake up from nightmares and ask for their mother and deserve at least one person in this house who isn't afraid to simply be there. She stopped. The words hung in the air between them, not as accusation, but as something worse. Truth plainly spoken, by someone with nothing left to protect. Kyung-soo said nothing. The envelope was on his desk the following morning. He knew what it was before he opened it. Her resignation, handwritten, brief, professional. 2 weeks' notice waived at his discretion. He found her in the hallway, her bag already packed, coat on, the quiet efficiency of a woman who had made her decision and would not be theatrical about it. You don't have to go, he said. She looked at him evenly. I won't have your brother's suspicion poisoning the air your children breathe, she said. They deserve stability, not a household built on doubt. I haven't asked you to leave. No, she agreed. But you haven't asked me to stay either. And I won't wait in a house where trust has an expiry date. Seo appeared at the top of the stairs. Halima! Small voice. Confused. Halima looked up. Something crossed her face. Swift and controlled. The way she handled everything she didn't want to burden anyone else with. I'll see you soon, sweetheart, she said gently. Be good. She walked out the front door. Kyung-soo stood in the hallway and did not stop her. He told himself it was the right decision. Controlled. Rational. The kind of thinking that had kept him and everyone around him alive. Outside, rain had started again. He stood at the window and watched her figure move down the drive until the gray swallowed her completely. He did not feel like a man who had made the right decision. He felt like a man who had just made a very familiar mistake, and would not know how permanent it was until the house reminded him. Which it did. Almost immediately. Took less than 48 hours. Kyung-soo had expected adjustment. Children were resilient. He had read that somewhere or been told it in the vague way people offer reassurances they haven't tested. Staff would manage. Routine would hold. The house had functioned before Halima and would function after. It did not function. Seo stopped speaking on the second day. Not gradually. Not a slow withdrawal. She simply stopped mid-morning between breakfast and nothing, as though she had decided that if the words couldn't reach the right person, there was no point in releasing them. She sat with her bare and looked at things. Staff spoke to her gently and she looked through them. Ji-eun refused to eat. He sat at the table, plate in front of him, and waited with the patience of someone who understood on some wordless level that the meal was wrong. Not the food, not the temperature, but something essential about the shape of the moment. The milk was warmed once. He pushed the cup to the edge of the table and did not touch it again. Ha-jun waited by the front gate. Every afternoon, after nap time, he positioned himself there. Small figure, hands around the iron bars, and watched the drive. Not crying. Not asking. Just watching. The way a child watches when they have learned that asking out loud doesn't always help. The staff tried. They were competent, patient, professional people who did everything correctly and could not reach the children at all. Kyung-soo tried. He sat on the nursery floor the third evening, which felt absurd. A man of his particular architecture, cross-legged on a rug with a picture book, and read to them in a voice that was too controlled, too careful, landing in the room like something from a foreign language.
Ji-eun listened politely.
Ji-eun fell asleep facing the wall. Min-seo sat beside Kyung-soo and said nothing and leaned her head against his arm with a weight that felt like forgiveness he hadn't earned. He sat there long after she fell asleep. In the quiet, he kept seeing things that weren't there anymore. Halima's hands working through Min-seo's hair with unhurried focus. The way she'd known, without being told, to sit in the dark beside Ha-jun and simply exist there. The twice-warmed milk, every morning, without reminder or complaint. He thought of Ji-eun again. The Sunday morning. The private smile. Can you believe these three? He had looked away then too. Seok-jin came on the 5th day. He didn't sit down. He stood across the desk with the expression of a man delivering information he had verified 3 times before bringing it forward. It was Byung-chul, he said. Kyung-soo looked up. He's been running a quiet campaign. 3 months. Feeding doubt through your inner circle, manufacturing pressure points, looking for fractures. Seok-jin set a thin document on the desk. The goal wasn't Halima specifically. She was incidental. The goal was you. Distracted, emotionally destabilized, making reactive decisions while he repositioned behind you. The room was very quiet. She was never the threat, Seok-jin said. Not gently, simply. She was the variable he used because she was the one thing in this house that was actually working. Kyung-soo did not reach for the document. He didn't need to. The information was already settling into the shape of something he had known and overridden. The part of him that had watched her move through his house for weeks and found nothing that looked like a motive except care, plain and unrewarded. He had removed the one person holding his children together. Because his brother had asked questions, Kyung-soo had been too compromised to examine clearly. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, the front gate was visible from this angle. Ha-jun was not there now, too late in the evening. But Kyung-soo could see the exact spot where he stood every afternoon. Small hands on the iron bars, watching for someone who did not come. Where is she? He asked. Seok-jin gave him the address without hesitation. He had looked it up already, because he had known, before Kyung-soo did, that this moment was coming. The rain was the same. That was the first thing he noticed. Pulling out of the mansion drive at 11:40, the city wet and indifferent around him, the wipers keeping their steady rhythm against glass. It was the same rain, the same hour, the same road. Everything else was different. The first time, he had been coming home reluctantly, dragged back by some instinct he couldn't name. Tonight he was leaving deliberately, moving towards something he had no template for. A man who had built his entire survival on never needing to undo a decision, driving through the dark to undo one. He didn't take the SUV. He drove himself. Her apartment building was quiet. A modest street, well-kept, the kind of neighborhood that asked nothing of you. He sat outside for longer than he would admit. Engine off, rain on the roof, and looked at the light in her second-floor window. She was awake. He had not prepared what he would say. He had considered it for the entire drive and arrived with nothing, which was perhaps the most honest he had been about anything in years. He went inside. He stood outside her door for a long moment. Then he knocked. Footsteps. Pause, she was checking, cautious. Then the door opened. Halima looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already grieved. Not shocked, not unwelcoming, just very tired. She was in plain clothes, hair down, the careful professional composure of the mansion entirely absent. She looked younger without it, and more worn. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know. She waited. Min-seo hasn't spoken in 4 days, he said. Something moved across her face. Swift, unguarded. The way pain moves when it hasn't been fully processed yet. Ji-eun won't eat. Ha-jun stands at the gate every afternoon. He said it plainly, because dressing it differently would have been a dishonesty neither of them deserved. The staff are doing everything correctly. It doesn't matter. Halima looked at him steadily. And that's why you came. A pause. No, he said. The word cost him more than she could see. I came because Seok-jin brought me information I should have found myself, before I let my brother's questions become my own. He held her gaze. Byung-chul was running a campaign. Against me. You were never the risk. You were the variable he used because you were the thing in that house he couldn't account for. She absorbed this without expression. I chose suspicion over evidence, he continued. I chose pride over peace. And I let you walk out of that house while my daughter stopped speaking. He stopped. I don't know how to be a father. You know that. You've watched me learn it badly for weeks. But I know what I saw in that nursery the first night. And I know what the house sounds like without you in it. The hallway was very quiet. I'm not your solution, Kyung-soo, she said softly. I'm not a function. I know what you are, he said. You're the first person in 4 years who stayed in my house without an agenda. Who held my children on the floor at midnight because they needed someone and you were there. He paused. You told me you stayed because they didn't choose this life. I'm asking you to come back for the same reason. She looked at him. Tired eyes, searching, the particular expression of someone weighing whether hope is worth the cost of being wrong again. And you? She said quietly. What do you want? He considered lying. He had the vocabulary for it, deflection, reframe, the controlled non-answer that revealed nothing. He didn't use it. You made me want to stay, he said. In my own house, with my own children. I hadn't wanted that in 5 months. A beat. That's not nothing. Not for me. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but full. The kind that follows something true. I'll come back, she said finally. For them. I know, he said. She looked at him a moment longer. But you should also know, she said quietly, that I am not your weakness. Don't treat me like one again. No, he agreed. You're not. He meant it in a way he didn't yet have words for, that she was, in fact, the opposite of weakness. That she had walked into his house carrying her own wreckage and chosen, without recognition or reward, to be steady for 3 children who needed it. That was not weakness. He wasn't entirely sure what it was. But he intended, this time, to stay long enough to understand it. She arrived at 9:30 in the morning. Kyung-soo had not told the children. He hadn't known how to prepare them for something he wasn't certain of himself until her car appeared at the end of the drive. And by then, there was no time for preparation anyway. Ji-eun saw her first. He had been at the window, not the gate, the window, because Kyung-soo had quietly asked him to wait inside this morning without explaining why, and the sound he made was not a word. It was something before words. He was running before Kyung-soo could move. Ji-eun followed, bare feet on the hallway floor, not fully understanding but following his brother the way he always did, on instinct and trust. Seo was in the sitting room. She had been sitting with her bear since breakfast. The particular stillness she had maintained for 4 days, present in the room but unreachable, looking at things without seeing them. Kyung-soo had been watching her from the doorway when Ji-eun's footsteps thundered past. She looked up. Then she slid off the chair and walked to the hallway with the quiet urgency of someone who has learned not to run toward things they're not sure are real. Halima came through the front door and nearly lost her footing. Ji-eun reached her first. Arms around her waist, face pressed into her coat, not speaking, just holding with the total physical commitment of a child who has been waiting so long that words feel inadequate. Ji-eun arrived seconds later, attaching himself to her other side, and Halima's bags went down and her arms went around both of them and she bent over them the way she always had, completely without reservation, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. Seo stood 3 feet away. She looked at Halima with an expression that was too careful, too measured for a child her age, the look of someone who had been disappointed recently and was deciding whether to risk it again. Halima looked back at her over the boys' heads. She didn't reach out. She didn't prompt. She simply waited, steadily, openly, the way she always waited, giving Seo the space to come to her own conclusions. Seo crossed the 3 feet. She pressed her face into Halima's coat and her small hands found the fabric and fisted into it. The same grip from the first night, the same wordless claim. Then, muffled and small, and the most important words spoken in that house in 4 days. Stay. The hallway went completely still. Kyung-soo stood at the foot of the stairs. He had not planned to speak. He had intended this moment to belong entirely to the children, to let Halima's return be what it was, uncomplicated by him. But Minasio's word hung in the air, a question in the shape of a plea, and he found himself answering before he'd decided to. "She will," he said. Halima looked up at him over 3 small heads. He held her gaze and said nothing else. He didn't need to. The statement had been made in front of his children, in his own hallway, and he was not a man who made statements he didn't intend to keep. They ate together that evening. All of them, the triplets in their seats, Halima no longer navigating the careful professional distance of before, Kyung-soo at the head of the table in a shirt without a jacket, which was, for him, the equivalent of another man arriving in pajamas. Informal, present, deliberately there. Ji-eun drank his milk without comment. It had been warmed twice. Ha-jun talked through the entire meal about something that had happened with a beetle in the garden that morning. A story with no clear resolution but tremendous detail, and nobody interrupted him. Minacio ate with one hand and kept the other resting on Halima's sleeve. A small continuous reassurance she was conducting for her own benefit. Kyung-soo watched all of it. He had sat at tables where men feared to speak without permission. He had conducted meetings that determined the movement of money and men across 3 territories. He had eaten in silence in this same room for years, served by staff who moved carefully around the edges of his mood. This was better. Immeasurably, uncomplicatedly better. He called Byung-chul the following morning. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He laid out, in the particular quiet tone that his brother knew better than to argue with, exactly what Suk-jin had uncovered. The timeline, the methods, the intent. The way Byung-chul had used Halima as a tool not because she posed any genuine risk, but because she had represented something stable in Kyung-soo's orbit, and stability, for Byung-chul's purposes, was inconvenient. Byung-chul began to construct a defense. Kyung-soo let him finish. Then he removed him from every inner circle, every access point, every channel through which his brother had conducted business adjacent to his own. Cleanly, completely, the same surgical efficiency he applied to everything. "Don't come to this house again," he said. He ended the call. That evening, after the children were asleep, he stood in the hallway outside the nursery. A habit now, this checking, this listening for the quality of the quiet. The quiet was good tonight. Peaceful. Not heavy. Not wrong. He thought about what he had told himself 5 months ago. That distance was protection, that love was liability, that the best thing he could do for the people in his house was stay out of it. He had been wrong. Not about the danger was real, would always be real, was the permanent condition of the life he had chosen. But he had drawn the wrong conclusion from it. He had protected the structure and abandoned the people inside it. He had kept himself at a distance and called it sacrifice when it was, in fact, the easier choice. Staying was harder. Staying required him to be present for things he couldn't control. Nightmares, grief, a child who stopped speaking, a woman who deserved better than his suspicion. But staying, he was learning, was the only thing that actually worked. He would run his empire the same way he always had. But he would come home. Every night. He would come home. Months passed. The mansion changed the way seasons change. Not in a single moment, not dramatically, but in accumulation. Small things compounding. Until one morning you look up and the room is entirely different from what it was, and you cannot point to the exact day it turned. The hallways were louder now. Ha-jun had developed strong opinions about breakfast and communicated them at volume. Ji-eun had learned to climb and applied this skill indiscriminately. Countertops, bookshelves, Kyung-soo's desk chair on at least 3 documented occasions. Min-seo had entered a phase of narrating everything she observed in a continuous, authoritative commentary that required no audience and acknowledged no interruption. The house, which had once felt like a monument, grand and cold and preserved in grief, felt lived in now, messy in places, warm throughout. Kyung-soo still ran his empire. The meetings still happened. The negotiations, the decisions, the particular quality of silence he employed in rooms where men needed reminding of where power actually resided. None of that had changed. His rivals had not softened toward him. The work had not become less demanding or less dangerous. But he came home. Every evening, not always early, not always before the children were asleep, but he came. And on the nights he arrived after bedtime, He would stand in the nursery doorway for a moment before going to his own room, just to hear the breathing, just to confirm the quiet was the right kind. Seok-jin had noticed. He said nothing about it, because Seok-jin was intelligent enough to understand that some changes in a man are not commentary but conclusion. Halima remained. She was still, technically, the maid, a distinction that had grown increasingly abstract as the months accumulated. She was the first voice the triplets asked for in the morning and the last presence they settled under at night. She knew Yeejun's milk routine and Hajun's nightmare triggers, and the precise arrangement of Min Seo's stuffed animals without which sleep was apparently impossible. She moved through the house with the same steadiness she always had, professional, warm, unhurried. She still called him sir in front of staff. She had never asked for anything beyond what the role required. But there were mornings now, quiet ones before the children descended, when she and Kyung-soo sat on opposite sides of the kitchen table with coffee, and the silence between them was not distance. It was something more like understanding, the particular ease of two people who have seen each other clearly, at their worst and most uncertain, and remained anyway. He did not yet have a name for what they were building. He suspected the name would arrive in its own time, and that rushing it would damage it. He was learning patience. Slowly, imperfectly, he thought about Ji-eun still, not with the same gutted, airless grief of the first year, the kind that made him keep his coat on inside his own house because taking it off meant staying and staying meant feeling. That grief had not disappeared. He did not think it was supposed to, but it had changed shape, become something he could carry and still move forward under, rather than something that nailed him in place. He visited her grave on a Tuesday in early spring. Alone, the way he always had. He stood for a long time before speaking, which was also how he always had. He told her about the triplets.
Ajunesa opinions.
Ji-eun's climbing. Min Seo's commentary. He told her they were good. He told her they still missed her in the particular wordless way children miss things they loved before they had language for love. He told her he was staying now. He thought she would have considered that sufficient. He thought, knowing her, she would have considered it overdue, and would have communicated this with the small private smile that had always said more than she bothered to put into words. He almost smiled himself, standing there. Almost. On a Friday evening in late spring, he came home early. He came home to noise. Hajun's running commentary, Yeejun's triumphant announcement of some achievement in the garden, Min Seo's authoritative narration of events as she experienced them. He came home to the smell of food from the kitchen and the specific domestic chaos of three children who had been outside all afternoon and brought evidence of it indoors. He stood in the entrance for a moment, not frozen, not reluctant, just still, taking it in. The mess and the noise and the warmth of a house that had been a mausoleum and was now, unmistakably, a home. Min Seo spotted him first. "Daddy's home," she announced to no one in particular, with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone reporting a fact about the weather. Then she returned to whatever she was doing. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. He took off his coat. He stayed. The most dangerous man in the city had survived raids, blood debts, betrayal, and the particular brutality of grief with no clean ending. He had built his empire on silence and fear and the cultivated certainty that closeness was a liability. He had been wrong. Not about the danger. The danger was real and remained real and would require his full attention for as long as he chose this life. But strength, he had learned, was not silence. It was not distance. It was not the control of a room through fear or the management of people through careful, protective removal. Strength was the thing Halima had demonstrated on a nursery floor at midnight. Steady, unglamorous, asking for nothing, giving everything. The courage to remain present inside someone else's pain and not flinch away from it. The courage to stay. That was the thing that had unmade him and remade him and was remaking him still. He was learning it the way he learned most things that mattered, slowly, imperfectly, in the daily accumulation of small choices. But he was learning. And for the first time since Ji-eun's death, midnight found him not arriving or leaving or standing frozen in a hallway between one life and another. Midnight found him already home. If you enjoyed the story this far, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next chapter and enjoy more story from us. And if this story gave you chills, drop a like and share it with someone who loves powerful romance with a dangerous edge. Your support keeps these stories coming. Thank you.